At 2:14 am, the secure line at Kensington Palace lit up. William, Prince of Wales, picked it up with a heavy breath on the other end, a financial advisor with trembling urgency. What followed was not just a discovery, but the beginning of a royal reckoning. A breach, a betrayal, and a decision that would tear the brothers apart forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The words that followed landed like cold iron. Numbers, timestamps, routed accounts too precise to be rumor, too calculated to dismiss. William listened in silence as the advisor explained that irregular movements had surfaced inside a trust long considered untouchable, a fund protected by layers of discretion and tradition. This wasn't gossip passed through courtiers. It was data. And it was damning. At first, the palace response was denial disguised as reason. Cyber intrusion, perhaps. A sophisticated breach. That would be easier. That would be survivable. But the reassurance unraveled as quickly as it formed. Transactions repeated with a rhythm that suggested intention, not accident. The trail pointed outward, slipping through jurisdictions designed to erase footprints, finally resting in Zurich, an offshore node notorious for silence. An insider name surfaced, one that froze the room. The advisor's voice faltered as the implication became unavoidable. The trust tied to Harry was active, manipulated, and exposed. What had been safeguarded for decades was suddenly bleeding through invisible cracks. William's disbelief hardened into something sharper. Strategy replaced shock. He asked for timelines, for access logs, for every anomaly mapped against every safeguard. Advisors crowded in, each bringing fragments that assembled into a picture too clear to ignore. The inheritance, Diana's legacy, private royal provisions, the quiet promises made after loss, was no longer dormant. It was moving. And movement meant vulnerability. The advisors spoke carefully, weighing every word against the weight of consequence. The recommendation was unanimous, though none said it lightly. Freeze the assets now, ask questions later. Protect the institution first. Protect the crown. The silence that followed was heavier than the revelation itself. William understood what the order would signal, even if it never reached the public. Freezing the trust would be interpreted as judgment, as accusation, as a line drawn not just across accounts but across blood. He thought of promises whispered in grief, of a mother's faith that her sons would be shielded from the machinery of power. He thought of how quickly protection turns into control when fear enters the room. And yet fear was already there, fear of exposure, of manipulation, of a narrative that could spiral beyond containment. When the authorization was finally given, it was done with a steady hand that betrayed the storm underneath. Systems locked, access revoked, notifications queued for a moment yet to come. In that instant, William understood the cost. He wasn't merely stopping money. He was stopping time, halting a story mid-sentence, daring the truth to reveal itself under pressure. And as the palace settled into a restless quiet, one certainty remained, sharp and unavoidable. The moment William signed off on the freeze, he knew he wasn't just halting money, he was igniting a royal firestorm that couldn't be extinguished. Few knew the true size of Harry's inheritance. Tucked away from public record, it was a mix of Diana's legacy, royal stipends, and secret investments tied to centuries of monarchy. But now every pound was frozen, locked behind royal decree. And Harry had no idea why. The silence that followed the freeze wasn't just chilling, it was calculated. While William waited behind tightly closed doors, Harry remained oblivious in California, unaware that the financial bedrock beneath him had been sealed shut by the very institution he once called home. The money wasn't just currency, it was lineage. A symbol. The final thread that tethered him to a past that had both protected and tormented him. Long before the headlines, long before the split, Diana had ensured that her sons would never be truly dependent on the institution. Her will, both public and whispered, carved out a private fortune for Harry intended not just as inheritance, but insurance. An emotional lifeline laced with the quiet hope that he would be free to choose his future. But Diana's foresight wasn't the only layer. Queen Elizabeth II had, in her own way, added to the silent fortune. Discreet allocations through trusts and accounts unknown to the public, deposited into low-profile institutions across the Commonwealth. Some of the most substantial sums lay dormant in Cayman, with others silently guarded in the Isle of Man. It was legacy money unseen, untouched, and most importantly, unspoken. To the outside world, Harry had broken from the firm. But in private ledgers and coded entries, he remained deeply entangled. This wasn't about flashy royal titles or ceremonial jewels. This was about capital, influence, and a long-buried truth that Harry's financial independence was never fully independent. Every move he made outside the monarchy still cast a shadow into the palace. And as William reviewed the ledger entries line by line, what disturbed him more than the movements themselves were the implications of who might be pulling the strings. Someone was playing with legacy, not just exploiting funds, but weaponizing them. What made this freeze more painful was what it truly represented. For Harry, this fortune wasn't just wealth, it was memory, a mother's gift beyond the grave, a queen's silent nod of approval, the final safeguard against institutional punishment. And now it was frozen, not by a stranger, not by a rival, but by the very brother who once promised to protect him. The emotional fracture was far deeper than any financial one. This was not a battle over figures, it was a reckoning over trust, over legacy, over the right to decide who still counted as family. For William, the decision had been both inevitable and unbearable. He feared these funds were no longer in Harry's hands at all, that someone with dangerous ambition had crept into their sanctity. William didn't want to believe it. But the patterns, the offshore flows, the inconsistencies, they painted a truth too jagged to ignore. He couldn't risk the monarchy being dragged into a scandal it didn't see coming. So he acted, swiftly, quietly, and with more grief than anger. Because deep down he knew, this wasn't just a protective measure, it was a betrayal of a sacred bond. But what William didn't know yet was that this financial riddle wasn't just about money. It was about loyalty and the quiet war waged within palace walls. Inside palace corridors, one name kept surfacing: Meghan. Some claimed she was unaware, others whispered she orchestrated it. But buried in encrypted financial logs was a transaction code that linked a California address to a London-based royal account. Coincidence or control? William wasn't ready to answer that. Not yet. But behind closed doors, his advisors were drawing the lines with increasing clarity, and the picture they painted was too deliberate to ignore. Repeated withdrawals small enough to avoid alarms, but regular enough to form a pattern, were being funneled into a shell company, quietly tied to Montecito. The name of the entity was intentionally bland, but the address was precise. It wasn't just any property. It was traced back to a structure owned by a private trust Meghan had quietly formed during their early days in America. At first, the financial team hoped it was a clerical loop, an old auto debit, or even a forged tag piggybacking off royal metadata. But as deeper layers unraveled, investigators uncovered a clear path of fund extraction. The deposits were being split across digital wallets, routed briefly through Canadian clearing networks, and then consolidated back into a U.S. entity that refused to disclose its beneficial owners. The timing was just as suspicious as the structure itself. Every major leak, every scandal Harry and Meghan had navigated coincided with unusual activity within the trust. To the public, it was speculation. To William, it was a time bomb, ticking louder with every day it went unaddressed. When news of the financial anomalies reached Meghan's legal team, the response was swift and clinical. A categorical denial. The Duchess has no knowledge of nor involvement in any financial arrangements connected to royal estates or trusts, the statement read. But behind that formality, the palace seethed. The denials only fueled suspicion, especially after an anonymous whistleblower from a private royal banking office leaked internal emails hinting that palace access credentials may have been compromised. The emails were redacted, but one phrase stood out: pattern suggests familiarity with legacy Diana accounts. That changed everything. What had once looked like digital theft now began to resemble an inside job with someone who had intimate knowledge of how royal money moved. William's inner circle fractured into tension. Some pressed for immediate legal confrontation, others begged restraint. They warned of public backlash, of feeding into media frenzy, of allowing the crown to be pulled into yet another front-page feud. Catherine, ever the steady hand, pulled William aside and said one thing that stuck. Don't make it personal. Not yet. It was more than advice. It was a plea for dignity, for patience, for control. But William was spiraling between his role as future king and his role as elder brother. Every new discovery made it harder to distinguish where duty ended and anger began. What tortured him most was the possibility that this wasn't just a financial breach, it was a betrayal wrapped in charm and legality. Meghan, whether active or unaware, was now the center of a web that could rip apart what little trust remained in the House of Windsor. But how far could he go without risking everything? How many secrets could be exposed before the monarchy itself looked complicit? The questions piled, unanswered, heavier with every hour. And as William edged closer to the truth, another bombshell dropped, this time from a name he never expected. In the stillness of Balmoral, Princess Anne summoned William. No aides, no advisors, just a sister to a future king, warning of the fallout if the truth escaped. The firm survives on silence, she said. You break that you burn the crown. The room carried the weight of decades, of duty etched into every corner, and of memories that refused to fade. Anne was not there to scold or console, she was there to contain. Her voice didn't tremble. It never did. But beneath the steely calm, there was something deeper. Fear. Not for herself, nor even for William, but for the institution that had survived wars, divorces, betrayals, and was now dangling by threads of secrecy. Anne didn't need to mention names. The implications were clear. Meghan. The money. The whispers. But more than that, she questioned how much of this storm was born from within. There had been murmurs, misplaced reports, sudden access changes, misfiled financial documents, and it all felt too orchestrated to be coincidence. Someone's feeding the cracks, she told William, her tone like cold steel. Either to break us, or to gain from our breaking. She did not rule out sabotage. She did not rule out betrayal. But she made one thing absolutely clear: public trust was their last currency. And once spent, it would not return. William listened, torn between the son he once was and the monarch he was becoming. He had always respected Anne's unshakable clarity, her refusal to bend to drama or distraction. But this wasn't just about preservation. It was about principle. He believed silence now meant complicity, that hiding the truth, shielding names, burying evidence, it would only birth something worse later. He spoke of justice, of Diana's legacy, of how silence had suffocated them all once before. But Anne was firm. We are not built for scandal. We are built to endure. Her words weren't cold, they were survival. And yet, she didn't defend Camilla directly. In fact, Anne's tone shifted when the Queen's name arose. Not accusatory, not protective, just wary. She mentioned subtle inconsistencies in Camilla's oversight of certain financial matters. Unusual meetings. A sudden tightening of communication around Clarence House. Anne didn't accuse, but she didn't deny what others had started to fear. That Camilla wasn't just filling a space left by a fading king, she was shaping it. And her influence, if left unchecked, might be driving decisions that no longer protected the family, but preserved her place within it. As the conversation wore on, William's silence became heavier. He was realizing just how alone he was becoming. The more he pursued the truth, the more the walls closed in. Those around him spoke of legacy and lineage, but few mentioned loyalty. True loyalty. And now, even Anne, his strongest familial anchor, was urging caution over confrontation. It wasn't betrayal. It was pragmatism. But to William, it felt like surrender. And yet, her warning echoed louder than ever as he stood to leave. If this falls apart in the public eye, we all fall with it. Yet even as Anne cautioned secrecy, another player was preparing to blow everything open with or without palace consent. In a locked drawer inside Diana's former study at Kensington, Catherine found a red leather folder, untouched for decades. Inside, handwritten notes, a sealed letter, and one instruction scrawled in ink fading with time. If anything happens to my sons, follow the money. The moment her eyes landed on those words, a chill ran through her, not just of fear, but of something deeper. Recognition. As if, Across the years, Diana had whispered a warning meant only for this precise moment. Catherine hadn't gone searching out of curiosity. She had gone in quiet desperation, chasing a feeling that something wasn't right. The inconsistencies, the financial noise, the palace's unnatural stillness, it all pointed to a truth buried beneath decades of ceremonial distractions. What she discovered within that folder was more than maternal foresight. It was prophecy. Diana had laid out concerns about how royal finances could be manipulated if left unchecked. Scribbled notes described meetings she had with unnamed advisors, quiet suspicions about secret accounts, and even a hand-drawn diagram of a structure that mirrored the very offshore pathways now in question. Catherine trembled as she realized the implications. Diana hadn't just anticipated foul play. She had mapped out how it might unfold. One document, cryptic and partially burned at the edges, seemed to reference a coded account with initials matching Harry's. A ledger with incomplete entries, symbols and initials she didn't fully understand, but enough to suggest a protective measure had been attempted. A safeguard, perhaps one that had now been breached. The emotional weight of this discovery was crushing. Catherine wasn't just the Princess of Wales. She was now the steward of a buried truth, one that could unravel the fragile threads of what little unity remained in the royal household. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to tell William. Not yet. He was too close, too wounded by betrayal and power. This wasn't a time for rage. It was a time for strategy, for careful silence, for observation. She knew that William's next move could define his reign before it had even begun, and she wasn't ready to let grief drive that decision. But she wasn't alone. One name came to mind, someone who had remained quietly loyal to the old codes, someone who had always viewed the crown with a blend of reverence and realism. Prince Edward. Catherine reached out in the dead of night, not through royal channels, but through a personal message carried by a trusted staff member. Edward responded with neither shock nor hesitation. His calm was unnerving but reassuring. She always knew, he said, eyes lingering on the folder. And in that quiet alliance, a plan began to form. One not sanctioned by the crown but by conscience. Still, time was no longer a luxury. As Catherine and Edward cautiously pieced together Diana's trail, the palace gates rattled with a new sound, one not of footsteps, but of sirens. Word was leaking. Journalists were sniffing. And before Catherine could act, the media caught scent of a brewing scandal, and a single headline shattered the palace calm. It was the headline that set the world on fire. Prince William freezes Harry's 28M inheritance amid banking probe. Within hours, global outlets picked it up. Accusations, conspiracy theories, and public fury exploded across continents, while the palace scrambled to control the narrative. The leak wasn't gradual, it was seismic. Someone had fed internal palace documents to a media conglomerate notorious for igniting royal scandals. Within minutes, screens from Sydney to Seattle lit up with the story. What had been contained within the walls of Kensington was now spinning wildly in the court of public opinion. The narrative shifted from cautious speculation to fierce condemnation. And at its center, William. Once the stoic heir, now painted as a cold-handed monarch in waiting, using power to punish his own blood. Lawyers for the Sussexes issued a statement barely 3 lines long, but those 3 lines detonated across headlines like a bomb. We are aware of the troubling developments concerning the Duke's inheritance. At this time, we will refrain from comment. But silence should not be mistaken for guilt. That final sentence was all the press needed to run wild. Theories flooded social media. Was Meghan being framed? Was William using his influence to erase Harry from the royal line, financially and symbolically? The internet fractured into factions. Some declared William a tyrant in training. Others claimed it was a last-ditch effort to preserve the monarchy from internal corruption. But one thing was clear: public trust was unraveling fast. By morning, #FreeHarry was trending globally. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace with signs demanding transparency. Others appeared outside the Sussexes' Montecito mansion, waving flags and banners calling for justice, accountability, and answers. Influencers, commentators, and even members of parliament began weighing in. Was this a private financial dispute or the surfacing of a long-suppressed civil war within the monarchy? Old footage of Diana's interviews began to resurface. her warnings about institutional control haunting every news cycle like an echo of prophecy. The legacy she left behind had become a battlefield between her sons. Inside the palace, the mood turned to panic. Crisis meetings were called, but no one could agree on the line to take. Damage control became a guessing game. Some pushed for a strong denial. Others argued that silence would preserve dignity. But silence, in this moment, sounded like guilt. And Charles III, whose voice could have calmed the storm, remained completely, devastatingly quiet. His absence spoke louder than any speech. Rumors began to swirl about his health, his awareness, even his relevance in the current crisis. The throne looked paralyzed. And in that vacuum, speculation ruled. William, once the figure of reliability, now stood accused of cruelty. What had begun as an act of protection was now perceived as an act of vengeance. The palace underestimated one thing: the world's memory of Diana's compassion. To freeze her legacy, even temporarily, was seen as sacrilege. Sympathy tilted. Rage burned hotter. And the question no one dared ask aloud began to rise in every room. Had William just crossed a line he could never return from? And just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, Harry landed in London. Unannounced, demanding answers. No cameras. No aides. Just two brothers in Windsor's West Wing, one demanding what's his, the other holding the keys to it all. What was said inside those stone walls remains hidden, but the aftermath was written on every strained face the next day. The meeting had been arranged in hushed tones by Charles's private secretary, a final attempt to mend the spiraling disaster before it ruptured the family beyond repair. Harry had landed unannounced, but his message was clear: he would not be ignored. And William, weighed down by pressure from the palace, the press, and the burden of decision, knew he couldn't defer this reckoning any longer. The moment they stood in front of one another, the atmosphere turned electric. Years of tension boiled to the surface with no barrier to contain it. Harry's fury was immediate, demanding answers. Why had his inheritance been frozen? Why was his family treating him like an outsider? And who was feeding the press stories that painted him as a thief in his own bloodline? William didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Instead, he opened a folder and slid it across the polished table, his eyes fixed on Harry's face. Inside were financial statements, flagged transfers, internal memos from royal auditors, and a timeline Harry had never seen. What began as anger shifted into disbelief as Harry scanned the documents. His hands trembled, his eyes narrowed. "I didn't authorize any of this," he said, voice cracking. "I don't even recognize half these companies." But William was unmoved. He wanted to believe his brother, but he had learned painfully that good intentions didn't erase consequences. He laid out the facts as he saw them. Suspicious transfers, repeated access attempts using security codes tied to Harry's former staff, entities with links to Montecito, patterns that couldn't be dismissed. And then, the question that cut deeper than any accusation. If it wasn't you, then who was it? And why didn't you protect what Mum left behind? Harry broke. The tears came fast, not out of guilt but exhaustion. "You think I'd dishonor her like that? You think after everything I left behind I'd still be trying to take?" There was no yelling now, just silence. Thick. Final. For a moment, neither spoke. It wasn't just a financial standoff, it was emotional warfare. Two lives shaped by the same tragedy, diverging in ways neither could fully explain. William stood not just as a brother, but as a guardian of the monarchy. And Harry, isolated, betrayed, but defiant, stood as a man who had already lost too much. The room held the ghosts of their mother, their childhood, and the crumbling hope that family would always triumph over duty. But no apology came. No resolution surfaced. Only a silent understanding that whatever bond once held them had been scorched beyond recognition. But even as their personal battle raged in private, the monarchy faced a threat far more devastating: Camilla. Behind oak doors in Clarence House, Queen Camilla was meeting with 3 advisors, none of whom were on the official royal payroll. Whispers suggested she'd been orchestrating something far bigger than damage control. Was this her silent coup? While the world watched William and Harry tear each other apart under the glare of global scrutiny, Camilla had been moving in silence, calculating, composed, and disturbingly calm. When the inheritance freeze first emerged, Insiders expected Camilla to distance herself. Instead, she embedded herself deeper. And when discussions arose about potentially reversing the freeze to de-escalate tensions, it was Camilla who reportedly warned against it, arguing that maintaining control was paramount, even if it risked public backlash. She claimed it was about protecting the monarchy's integrity. But others weren't so sure, especially after a name from her own bloodline surfaced. One of the financial firms flagged in the Zurich transfers had a direct connection to a distant cousin of Camilla, an obscure figure known for brokering discreet investments among aristocratic circles. The link was brushed off by her team as irrelevant. But royal aides weren't convinced. The transactions weren't isolated, they were timed with uncanny precision. And so were Camilla's recent meetings. Over the course of 3 weeks, she had hosted a series of private luncheons with foreign dignitaries, business moguls, and even a controversial Middle Eastern banker once accused of leveraging influence within European royal families. To most, they were harmless engagements. But to those paying attention, they painted the outline of something far more deliberate. As the monarchy strained under scandal, Charles III seemed to fade into the background. His statements became fewer, his public appearances almost ghost-like. Behind palace doors, many began to question if he was still making decisions at all. In that growing vacuum, Camilla stepped forward, not officially, not publicly, but with unmistakable authority. Her voice began replacing his in key briefings. Her approvals suddenly carried the weight of finality, and for some it felt less like assistance and more like occupation. The Queen Consort had become, in all but name, the monarchy's most powerful figure, and not everyone was willing to stand by quietly. Catherine, having seen enough, initiated a private confrontation. No guards, no audience, just 2 women. Both royal, both calculating, but with wildly different visions of loyalty. Details of the meeting never leaked, only the tension that followed it. Staff reported days of cold silence, cancelled appearances, and a notable shift in palace dynamics. More tellingly, a number of senior aides began submitting quiet resignations. Some moved to William and Catherine's camp, others left entirely. The shift wasn't explosive, but it was unmistakable. The royal household was splitting in ways not seen since the darkest days of Diana's war with the crown. It became clear that Camilla was no longer acting as a supporting figure, but a central architect in the chaos. Whether driven by ambition, self-preservation, or something more sinister, her influence now stretched into every corner of the crisis. And as alliances fractured and loyalties splintered, only one question remained. Was this all part of a long-laid plan? Or was Camilla simply the last person standing when the throne went quiet? And in the shadows of the crown, one figure made a final move, one that would decide everything. Weeks before his health visibly declined, Charles III rewrote his will. Few knew, fewer were meant to. But now his final act could undo everything Camilla, William, and even Harry had fought for. Inside the sealed envelope was a new heir to everything. The decision wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, veiled in secrecy, and guarded by the king's most trusted legal counsel. Charles had summoned his team not to review, but to reconstruct. He wasn't simply thinking of death, he was thinking of legacy. The chaos unfolding around his sons, the quiet rise of Camilla, the fractures within the crown, they all pointed to one bitter truth. The monarchy was no longer being shaped by blood, but by agendas. And Charles, before fading from public view, had chosen to intervene the only way he still could. The new will was drafted in silence, its contents known only to 3 individuals before it was locked within the royal vault beneath Windsor. What was removed shocked the few who glimpsed its early revisions. What was added stunned them more. According to one source close to the process, the primary beneficiary listed in Charles's final draft was someone no one expected. Not William, not Harry, but someone entirely separate from the traditional line, someone whose presence was meant to restore equilibrium rather than maintain hierarchy. It was less about favoritism and more about reshaping the balance of power after Charles was gone. And though the palace has never officially confirmed the name, whispers suggest the impact would be seismic. Following Charles's death, William received a letter handwritten, sealed, and delivered not through royal protocol but by Charles's oldest friend. The message inside was short. 6 words that offered no clarity, only wait. You'll understand soon. Lead with restraint. It wasn't explanation. It was instruction. And it forced William to sit in agonizing silence as the new will was reviewed in private chambers, far from media, far from advisors. Meanwhile, Harry, still reeling from the public fallout, found his fate suspended by a single clause buried deep in the document. 1 sentence. 1 condition. 1 decision left to an executor who, according to sources, had never even met Harry face to face. It was the final reminder that trust, once broken, doesn't just vanish, it calcifies into walls that no longer bend for emotion. As the dust settled, Catherine stood as the quiet witness to it all. She had fought for truth, carried the burden of Diana's final warning, and guarded her family's dignity through fire. And while the crown wobbled on uncertain ground, she, more than anyone, understood the paradox at its core. Sometimes protecting the institution meant standing apart from it. And sometimes justice arrived not as a roar but as a whisper sealed in an envelope. Because in the royal game of inheritance, the true currency isn't gold, it's trust. And trust once broken may never return. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.